And it's a problem that we're working on to resolve. I'm thrilled about what you guys are doing with your statewide teenage Republican organization. It's something that's sorely needed. I was very fortunate to inherit, and nothing to do with it, I inherited an extraordinarily strong group of the Ohio College Republican Federation, who the outgoing president was a young African-American student at Miami University. We just hired him to work in our office. And they're getting things organized now. Barack Obama came to my alma mater, the Ohio State University, it was about 3 months ago now. He gave the commencement address. And the thing that was just so confounding to me is I know that I was sitting there listening and reading about this speech the next day. He was talking to 8,000 graduates that day, probably 80% of whom, if they're registered to vote at all, supported him because they bought, the social issues and the things that, I joke all the time that the best way to make a college student into a Republican is when they graduate and go out and start a family and start a business and get a job and start paying taxes, and they become a Republican real quick. The problem is that doesn't happen until they're 30 years old. So throughout their 20s, they're still living in fantasy land and they're voting just like we are. And how they don't see this. These folks who supported him, almost probably nearly universally in those audiences, were graduating that day with a ton of college debt and walking into a very unsure employment environment, many of whom, I bet you half of them didn't have a job at all. And if they did, they're probably underemployed and not utilizing the degree that they and their parents just borrowed a lot of money to pay for. These are the kinds of things we need to be talking to these voters about. Don't wait till you're 30 to figure this stuff out. It's happening to you now. And you have an opportunity to affect the direction and the future of this community, this state, this country. Open your eyes, listen. And part of the problem is because we stopped trying. Because in the business of politics, it became more important to talk to folks about where it was more efficient to utilize their campaign resources. And they said, well, don't go on these college campuses, why try to turn out voters who are going to be against us 80-20? Why go into communities where these folks are against us 90-10? Don't try, stop talking to them. Spend your time in other counties where you can drive up your turnout and whatnot. And yeah, that's fine. But we have to have outreach and we have to have communication. I'll tell one quick little anecdote and then I'll wrap up all this boring stuff for you. Right after the election, I went and I met with some African American pastors in Columbus, and they were ready. They were ready for me. They wanted to yell at me. They wanted to talk to me about how frustrated they were. Many of them told me stories about how their fathers were Republicans and proud Republicans. Again, that was the tradition of our party. We were the party that was inclusive of African Americans for many, many decades, and had a lot of their support, much more than we have now. And they said, the Republican Party just left us. In this last election, you guys didn't want us to vote. You guys were going to court to make sure that we didn't have the right to vote. And we told our congregations that it was Republicans who was trying to keep you guys from exercising your constitutional right. And I listened, and I learned some things that day. And I said to them, well, were you aware that in 2004, when a lot of people complained about these long lines at election, the polling places in Ohio, that it was an African-American Republican Secretary of State who said, well, maybe we ought to expand what has now become known as early voting. And it was a Republican legislature that created early voting, a Republican governor who signed the bill, and every single Democrat in the legislature that year, including the gentleman who is right now the Democratic state chairman, voted against it. They all voted no. They were the ones who didn't want folks having the ability to not have to stand in long lines on election day. So I'm not going to stand here and defend this 35 days of early voting. It maybe hasn't had the effect, not maybe, it certainly hasn't had the effect, the consequence that we wanted it to have. In fact, since we've expanded, Republicans have expanded access to the ballot, turnout across Ohio has gone down in every election. So, in fact, the highest turnout we ever had in any election in the history of Ohio was in 2004. That year where everyone said they had to stand in lines too long and couldn't vote. So, so there's some hollowness to their argument, and the way we've gone about trying to fix it needs to be fixed again, and will be. And I said, did you know that it was a Republican Secretary of State who made sure every Ohioan got an absentee ballot application in the mail this past year? You know, and they looked at me and they quite frankly said, no, we didn't do that. But we had the mayor of Columbus, who's an African-American Democrat, come into our churches on Sunday before Election Day and tell everybody, Republicans don't want you to vote. Well, the problem was they just never heard the other side. No one had been in there to talk to them about what we've done and how we've tried to actually make these elections fair. We want these elections to be about everybody having the opportunity to get out and cast their ballot. That's what we want. And do so fairly, and not do so in a way that's going to cancel out my vote or your vote by having even one person cheat. We don't want to do that. We want to have some guardrails around our elections and then make sure everyone has the opportunity to express their opinion. Because when we do that, as we've seen in the highest turnout election in the history of the state, we win. When we get everybody involved and make sure everyone has an opportunity to shape the direction of the election, our ideas are better. Ohioans respond more to what we believe in. And when we have turnout, drop like what happened in 2012, that's when they win. And we can't allow that to happen again. We have to get united. We have to understand the things that we're doing are the things that are the right things for this country. We have to understand that if we had elected the guy who said he would start the process of repealing Obamacare on day one as President of the United States, we wouldn't be having this discussion within our own party right now about what to do about Medicaid expansion. There are consequences to losing elections, and we can't let that happen again. And unfortunately, I think sometimes we look for the person or the candidate that we want to agree with 100% of the time. Well, let me let you a little secret. You're never going to find it. Unless you're running yourself. Well, even sometimes I wonder if I've got it. And so what we have to do is we have to look at who's out there fighting for the things that are right. Who's out there fighting for the things that we just know are wrong. And I have no doubt in my mind as I continue to fight for this cause and have done so for many years, that electing Republicans means doing the right things for these communities, for the state, for this country. I'll continue to fight for that. I'll continue to work as hard as I possibly know how. I want to hear from you, and together, I know that we can, right this ship. We can do it again. We've done it before. We've done it many times, and I'm not losing hope yet. I know that Ohio can go back in the red column, stay there consistently. If we get this right, if we work together, we all do the things that we need to do to make this happen. So that's what I want my chairmanship to be about, and I'm very much looking forward to listening to you, hearing from you today, answering some of your questions, and then working with you toward victory in 2013, 2014, and then making Ohio red again in 2016 when we put a Republican back in the White House. So thank you very much for hearing me this morning, and I look forward to answering some of your questions. Certainly, yeah, just go ahead.
Matt, just a comment. I think one of the biggest problems we've had in the last two elections is we've been elected, or at least the RNC. The RNC pushed down our throats in the grassroots over the rejection of the grassroots. Rhino Republicans at the head of the ticket, both with John McCain and with Mitt Romney. We haven't had a conservative president nominee at the top of our ticket since the 1984 election. The second election win against Walter Mondale. If you look down through the prism of history, H.W. Bush is a Rockefeller Republican. His son, George W. Bush, is a Rockefeller Republican. Bob Dole was a Rockefeller Republican. Same way with John McCain, same way with Mitt Romney. And I think it will be the death knell of our party if we will go the way of the Whig Party 2016 if we do not have a true conservative top of the table. And I wrote Reince Priebus in Washington recently and told him exactly that. The RNC needs to stay out of federal elections and allow the grassroots to push the cream of the crop to the top of the ticket. We would have had a conservative this last time if it wouldn't have been for the RNC. And we're sick and tired of it, the grassroots. For someone that's worked the last several elections tirelessly with the call center, and when you field these calls and you talk to these constituents and say, and you introduce yourself, and the person on the other end of the line says, Larry, I can't do this again. I say, by you staying home, you're voting for Barack Obama. But that's where we're at. We had 6.5 million white Americans that voted in 08 that did not vote in 2012. They sat on their hands because they had enough. And if I had $1 for every time I've heard that, I'd be retired. So when you talk to Reince and Priebus and the rest of them in the RNC, tell them to stay the heck out. Primaries are up to the grassroots, not the RNC.
I appreciate your thoughts on that. Let me just take a quick minute to respond. We can't beat someone with no one. I think we already know who their someone is going to be, unless there's some massive change in the way the media wants to take a look at what happened with Benghazi, or there's some health concerns or something. Hillary Clinton is going to run for president. She's doing it now. And we don't know who our candidate's going to be. I think we've got a good crop of potential, candidates out there, from our governors to Senator Rubio to Senator Cruz and other folks who are out there talking about, possibly running. I think I'm excited about the possibilities of. We had Susana Martinez, who I don't know if she's going to run nationally sometime, but the first ever Latina governor in this country, come and headline our state dinner in Columbus back in June, to have her tell her story. Why am I a Republican? Very powerful, compelling stuff for folks to hear, and messages that we need to listen to. And listen, I agree with you. We need to choose our candidate for president very carefully in 2016, because if we choose the wrong one, we've seen what happens when the media gets a hold of somebody and turns them into someone that they really aren't.
And doesn't fight back.
And that's right. And I could go off on a tangent about the way that the media handled Mitt Romney. He was a good man. Okay? I got to know him personally back in 2007 and know his family and his wife. He's a good, strong person, but we never told that story about him. We never put a human face on him. We allowed that whole narrative. All the stuff about the auto bailout, that had nothing to do with the jobs that Barack Obama claimed it had created. That was all about continuing this narrative that Mitt Romney was a guy who wouldn't be there for you when the chips were down. That all he cared about his rich buddies. And those of us who knew him, Jesse, you know this too. People who knew him knew that wasn't true. Knew that was not the case about him. But that was certainly the picture that they painted of him, and it was very, very difficult to overcome. And let me just say this about it: as we're carefully choosing our candidate, and I mean carefully. What if I described a candidate to you who was a former Democrat running for president as a Republican, who had raised taxes, who was for amnesty for illegals, who expanded Medicaid? Anyone know who I'm talking about? That's right, I'm talking about Ronald Reagan. When I asked that question, a lot of groups, people threw their hand up and will say, when I ask who who I'm talking about, they'll say, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama. No, I'm talking about Ronald Reagan. And if we had applied a litmus test on any single one of those issues to Ronald Reagan and decided that he couldn't be our candidate because of A, B, C issue that had arisen, again, this is what I go back to about trying to find someone we agree with 100% of the time. If we had applied a litmus test to him on any one of those issues, and he ended up not being our candidate for that reason, think of the conservative revolution that we would have missed out on in the 1980s with tax reform and ending the Cold War and all the things that Ronald Reagan helped us do. Let's not forget this. Liberals don't even call themselves liberals anymore. They won't even use the word because Ronald Reagan made that a dirty word and put in the political axiom. That is really saying something. And so I just want to, I want us all to look, you know, inward. And when we're thinking about our candidates, I don't want to have a situation where we're looking at this line of great candidates we're bringing out and saying, oh, well, that guy said something I didn't like about immigration reform, and that guy said something I didn't like about taxes, and this guy stood next to Barack Obama during Hurricane Sandy, and that guy did, okay, listen, none of those things is necessarily the greatest, but we better make sure that we think very carefully about who we run for president in 2016, and not eliminate folks just because of one or two things that we might not agree with them about. We've got to look for a candidate who's going to help us lead a revolution, because that's what this country needs right now, a conservative revolution. And Ronald Reagan wouldn't probably have been able to win a primary today. And that's a problem. We need to make sure that we elect the next Reagan. Now, I drank the Kool-Aid with Mitt Romney. I thought that if he had won, that this country would absolutely have started going in a better direction. That all this capital that's on the sideline that people are not investing would have started, you know, that we brought some certainty to this, you know, and it took that process perhaps to get Governor Romney to be out there on the front line saying, we're gonna start the process of repealing Obamacare the day I swear in. I'm gonna take my oath, we're gonna get in the car, we're gonna drive to the White House, we're gonna start working on that. That's what we needed. And we got the opposite. So I hear you, and I appreciate it. Here's the only thing I'm going to say about our candidates as they start to make themselves known to us, that they want to start coming to Ohio and they're thinking about a national campaign and whatnot. This is the only thing I'm going to say. I'm going to say, if you want to run your campaign the way the last two were run, where folks are imported from out of state to come and tell us rubes here in Ohio what we need to do to win, don't come here. Don't bring your campaign. Go try to win Delaware and Massachusetts and Illinois and California. Don't bother with Ohio in your electoral map. I don't want to have anything to do. I don't want to put our people through that frustrating experience again. But if you're willing to work with our organization and our structure the way the 2004 Bush campaign did, which they did, and we won. If they're willing to do that, well, come on, because we'll give you all the support that you could possibly want. And that's it. That's going to be the extent of my involvement in terms of how we're going to choose our candidate. And I mean that, because I don't want to go through another experience like we just did. Yes?
You mentioned calling out the Democrats on things and standing, holding their feet to the fire, more or less.
Yeah.
You mentioned the black mayor of Columbus went to churches and campaigned.
Yeah.
What happened to separation of church and state? I've been told repeatedly in my church and that if they do that, they lose their tax exempt status. Why aren't we going after them?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we have to get down and dirty. If Fitzgerald runs from Cuyahoga County, let's put pictures of Demora and Russo behind him.
Oh, don't worry about that.
I mean, let's connect him. Let's go after him and stop being the nice guy.
Yeah, no question about that. When I think the Democrats really wanted Ted Strickland to run again. That was here's a dirty little secret of all of it. They were pushing Ted Strickland to run and be their candidate again because they thought in the theoretical rematch he would, come and vanquish, a race he should have won in 2010, and he could go back to the governor's office. Well, very privately, sitting around these, some of these rooms in Columbus, that's what we wanted to do. We couldn't wait to run against Ted Strickland again and tell that story about what his record was versus what our record is, and let voters decide. I think that would have been a much easier race to run. Now, first of all, let's not take Ed Fitzgerald lightly. He's new. He's got a fairly compelling story to tell. He comes from the most voter-rich and most Democrat-rich part of the state, and he's getting out there. Having said that, what you said is absolutely correct, and they're out there trying to catch lightning in a bottle, thinking they can knock off our governor. Well, usually when you're doing that, you're outside playing in the storm, and that's a pretty dangerous place to be. And so if he thinks for 1 second that we're not going to make sure voters know about what his real record is, he may regret this decision to seek this office before too long. But in the meantime, we've got an incredibly important story to tell about our record and the things that we've been doing. And we need to do that, we need to tell that effectively. But there ain't no way that anyone's gonna talk me or anyone at the party into laying off this fella, because there's a lot there to make sure that, that we're talking about in 2014, and we're gonna.
Yes, I want to just echo what Larry said about the national level of, well, it's his turn attitude, the way I label it.
Mm,
We must not let that filter down to the state level.
yeah,
You play an important part in that. We cannot get to the point where, well, so-and-so's been this, he's been that, he's been this. So it's his turn that we back in.
right,
We let that happen, we're gonna have the same thing going on that has gone on with the last several presidential elections.
fair. It's a fair criticism, and I'll tell you that, I'm not looking for a candidate who's been in office and feels like he's paid his dues. I'm looking for candidates that are working hard and know how to win. Let's take Sharon Kennedy just as a quick example. Everybody I'm sure in here met the force of nature, the phenomena that was Sharon Kennedy, who ran for the Ohio Supreme Court last year. It gets under my skin when I read these stories that people say, well, Sharon Kennedy won because of her last name. She ran against someone whose last name was Brown. So it's not like she was running against a Borges or some no-name. And she ran and she won because she worked her tail off and was everywhere. By the way, Judith French, who's running the next year along with Sharon, is doing the same thing. She's out there working her tail off as well. And so when I look I'm looking now kind of with my mind's eye toward the crop of potential future leaders of the state. And we've got some great potential candidates out there who know how to work hard, who know how to talk to our voters, who understand how incredibly important